Hello everyone. Today we're going to step into a moment that still feels like yesterday. The air is warm, but not too warm. That kind of gentle afternoon sunlight that turns everything gold. I can hear the distant hum of traffic, the soft clink of cups from the cafe across the street, and the faint laughter of children playing somewhere down the block. I'm sitting at a small wooden table, across from the person I have loved and protected more fiercely than anyone else in my life. His coffee sits untouched in front of him, steam curling into the air in thin, lazy ribbons. He's telling me about his plans for the week, tapping his fingers on the table in that absent-minded rhythm he's had since he was a boy. And in that instant, nothing feels wrong. Nothing feels like it's about to break. It's just us, the way it's always been. I remember leaning back in my chair, smiling at something he said, my chest feeling light. I remember thinking, this is safe. This is ours. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last time I could truly believe it. When I look back now, I can almost see the cracks forming, hairline thin, invisible to the untrained eye. I can almost hear the faint warning hum beneath his words. But in that moment, I chose to ignore it. After all, hadn't I spent years keeping him safe? Keeping the world from hurting him? I believed, with all my heart, that I could do it forever. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. Tell me in the comments below. Because here's the thing. The story I'm about to share isn't the kind that makes you sigh with relief at the end. It's not the kind where the hero swoops in just in time. It's the kind that sits in your chest, heavy and unmoving, because no matter how hard you try, some storms can't be stopped. That afternoon in the cafe, I could see his eyes soften when he talked about a new opportunity. A project, a connection, something that seemed to light a quiet fire in him. He looked older somehow, not in years, but in the weight of his thoughts. I felt proud, the way you do when someone you've watched grow begins to take bold steps into their own life. I didn't know those steps would lead him away from me. We finished our coffee, walked together toward the corner where our paths would split, his bus arriving in one direction, my walk home in the other. He gave me that easy smile, the one that had gotten him out of trouble 1,000 times as a child, and said, "I'll see you soon." I watched him go, his figure swallowed by the crowd. And just like that, I was alone on the sidewalk, the golden light still pouring over everything like honey, the air still carrying the sounds of a perfectly ordinary day. But for reasons I couldn't explain, my stomach felt heavy, like I'd just forgotten something important, something I couldn't name. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being overprotective again, that maybe I was just tired. But somewhere deep inside, a whisper stirred, warning me that the calm was only a cover. Looking back now, that was the last truly safe moment. Every step after that would carry us both closer to something I never could have prepared for. The one thing I couldn't protect him from. The first signs didn't come crashing in like a storm. They slipped in quietly, like shadows lengthening across the floor, so slow you hardly notice until the whole room feels darker. At first, it was small changes in his routine. He'd cancel our usual Wednesday dinners, saying he was caught up with work or something came up. Calls that once lasted an hour became quick check-ins, just enough to keep the connection alive, but never deep enough to hear what was really going on. I told myself life gets busy, that people grow and change, but the truth is, I've always been good at sensing when something isn't right. One evening, I called to see if he wanted to come by for a late meal. It was raining outside, that soft, steady rain that makes the streets glow under the lamplight. He answered on the third ring, his voice a little distracted, almost guarded. "Not tonight," he said, and paused, like he was searching for an excuse but couldn't quite find one. "I'm just tied up." When I asked if everything was okay, he laughed, too quickly, too brightly, and said, "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Then he changed the subject. I remember hanging up and staring at the phone in my hand, replaying his tone in my mind. He wasn't lying exactly, but there was something in the way he dodged my questions that left me unsettled. Over the next few weeks, little inconsistencies began to show. He'd mention being in one place, but later a casual comment would suggest he'd been somewhere else entirely. When I'd ask about it, he'd brush it off, call it a mix-up, or nothing worth explaining. And maybe I could have ignored it, if not for the change in his eyes. They used to meet mine with that open, unguarded warmth I'd known since he was young. But now, there was something else there, a flicker, like a curtain drawn halfway across a window. The first time I saw it was during a chance meeting on the street. I was coming back from the market, arms full of groceries, when I spotted him across the road. I called his name, expecting that familiar smile. Instead, he hesitated, just for a second, before crossing over to greet me. His hug felt rushed, like he was halfway out of it before it began. "I was just heading somewhere," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Can we talk later?" I nodded, watching him walk away. There was no bus stop that way, no coffee shop, no reason I could think of for him to be headed in that direction at all. It's strange, isn't it, how we talk ourselves out of what we already know. How we pretend that the distance we feel is temporary, just a phase, when deep down, some quiet part of us is already grieving the loss. I told myself not to overthink it. I'd done that before, worried too much, seen threats where there were none. But still, the unease followed me home, curled up in the quiet corners of my thoughts. It would be weeks before I learned the truth about what was pulling him away. And by then, it would already be too late to stop it. The first time I saw her, it was almost by accident. I was leaving the small bookstore near the station, the one with the creaky wooden floors and the smell of old paper, when I noticed him across the street. He wasn't alone. She stood beside him, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if she'd known him forever. She had that kind of presence that drew your eyes before you even realized you were looking. Polished, but effortless, the way some people carry themselves when they know they'll always be noticed. They didn't see me at first. I stayed where I was, half hidden by the bookstore doorway, telling myself I wasn't spying, just watching for a moment. The truth? I was taking in how different he looked. His posture, the way he leaned toward her, the way his voice softened when he spoke. It wasn't that he'd never had friends, or even close female friends. But there was something in the air between them. Something unspoken but unmistakable. And I knew, in that instant, that she was going to matter. She glanced up and spotted me before he did. Her smile didn't falter, but it shifted, just slightly. I've seen enough people in my life to recognize the flicker of calculation in someone's eyes. The quick sizing up of a stranger. In that fraction of a second, she knew I was important to him. And I knew she'd filed that away for later. He finally turned and saw me. "Hey!" His voice was cheerful, maybe too cheerful. "What are you doing here?" I crossed the street, balancing the paper bag of books on my hip. "Just browsing, and you?" He hesitated for the smallest moment. "We were just grabbing coffee." "We?" I glanced at her, and he quickly said, "This is..." But she cut in smoothly. introducing herself with a warmth so practiced it almost felt real. Almost. We spoke for only a minute or two, surface-level pleasantries, before they excused themselves. "We've got to get going," he said, and I noticed he didn't say where. I watched them walk away, my eyes fixed on the way her hand lingered on his arm, guiding him ever so slightly, like she was already steering him without him realizing it. On the walk home, I told myself not to judge too quickly. I'd been wrong about people before. Maybe she really was just a friend. Maybe she'd be good for him. But that night, lying in bed, the image of her eyes finding mine before his kept returning. There had been no hostility in them, only a quiet certainty, like she'd already decided the role she would play in his life. And though I didn't know her name before that day, I had the sinking feeling I'd be saying it, thinking it, for a very long time. It's hard to explain how relationships change before you can put a name to it. At first, the shift was so slight it could have been my imagination. He still called me, but less often. He still came by, but never stayed as long. The conversations we used to have about everything and nothing at all were now peppered with small silences, the kind where you can almost hear the other person measuring their words. And she was there, even when she wasn't. In the way his phone would light up mid-sentence and his eyes would flick down to check it, no matter how serious our conversation was. In the way his plans suddenly revolved around her schedule. In the way his stories started to include phrases like, "she says," or "we think." It wasn't that I begrudged him finding someone important. I'd always wanted him to have a partner who would care for him the way he deserved. But there was a subtle rewriting of the rules, a quiet rebalancing of loyalties, and I could feel myself being moved down the list without either of us admitting it. One Sunday afternoon, I invited him over for lunch like I always had. I'd cooked his favorite meal, the one I knew by heart. He arrived late, apologizing, saying they'd been out running errands. "She wanted to check out this new shop downtown," he added with a grin, as if sharing something light-hearted. But as we sat down to eat, he seemed distracted, glancing at his phone every few minutes. Finally, I asked, "Is everything okay?" "She's just making sure I don't forget something," he said casually. "We've got a thing later." A thing. That was all I got. No explanation, no invitation, just a vague wall where there used to be an open door. After lunch, I suggested we take a walk. We always did, just to stretch our legs and talk a bit more. But this time, he shook his head. "I should go. She's waiting." There was no malice in his tone, but I felt it. The absence of space for me. I started to notice other changes. The way he dressed. Sharper, more expensive pieces replacing the comfortable clothes he'd always worn. The way he spoke. Certain phrases that didn't sound like him, but like someone else's thoughts filtering through his voice. And then, there were the things he didn't talk about anymore. He stopped telling me about his worries, his fears, the little stumbles that made him human. Instead, every story was framed in a way that made life sound perfectly in control. As if imperfections weren't allowed to be shared with me anymore. One evening, I saw him across the street again, walking with her. I called out, but he didn't hear me, or maybe he didn't want to. She glanced over her shoulder and caught my eye for a moment before turning back to him, leaning in close, saying something that made him laugh. It struck me then, like a cold drop of water down the back of my neck. She wasn't just in his life. She was replacing mine in his. And the worst part? He didn't even seem to notice it was happening. There are certain sentences that lodge themselves in your memory, not because of what they mean in that instant, but because of what they'll come to mean later. For me, it was a late Saturday afternoon. I'd been cleaning the kitchen when my phone rang. His name lit up the screen, and I smiled, wiping my hands on a towel before answering. It had been over a week since we'd spoken properly. "Hey," he said, his voice lighter than usual, almost upbeat. "I wanted to tell you, she thinks it's time I set some boundaries." I paused. "Boundaries?" "Yeah," he continued, sounding perfectly reasonable. "She feels like I lean on you too much, that maybe I should handle things on my own more, you know, be more independent." I remember looking out the window, the late-day sunlight pooling across the floor, and feeling that word, independent, twist in my chest. "And you agree with her?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to give me my answer before he spoke. "I think she might be right. I'm not a kid anymore." It wasn't what he said that hurt the most. It was the way he said it. Calm, measured, as if this wasn't a sudden shift, but a decision they'd been discussing for a while. As if my role in his life had already been rewritten, and I was just now being informed. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I never thought of you as a kid. I thought of you as family." "I know," he said softly, "but sometimes family can hold you back without meaning to." That was the moment, the sentence I'll never forget. We wrapped up the call soon after, but I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with him through illness, all the times I'd fought for him when no one else would, all the choices I'd made to keep him safe. And now, somehow, I was the obstacle. It was subtle, but I could feel her fingerprints on that conversation. The phrasing, the careful framing of my care as something limiting. She hadn't told him to push me away outright. No, she was too clever for that. She'd simply planted the idea that my presence was a weight, and then stepped back to let him carry it out. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done, the house around me quiet. I thought about calling him back, telling him exactly what I thought of her influence. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was the realization that this wasn't just about a disagreement. This was a turning point. A line had been drawn, and it wasn't me who drew it. I went to bed that night with the hollow knowledge that I was already on the other side of it. I've always believed that when someone you love starts to drift away, you fight for them. Not with anger, not with ultimatums, but with reminders of who you've been to each other. With shared memories, familiar traditions, small acts of care that say, "I'm still here." So I tried. I called more often, even if the conversation stayed shallow. I invited him to Sunday dinners, made his favorite dishes, and kept my voice warm no matter how late he arrived or how quickly he left. I asked about his work, his friends, his plans. I laughed at stories I didn't fully understand because he no longer gave me the details. Once, I even suggested the three of us go out together, thinking maybe if she saw me as less of a threat, she'd loosen her hold. He agreed, and for a moment, I felt hope. But the night itself told a different story. We met at a restaurant he used to love, a small, cozy place with soft lighting and the scent of fresh bread in the air. I got there early, choosing a table in the corner where we could talk without shouting over the music. When they walked in, I stood to greet them. She was immaculate, hair styled to perfection, her dress the kind that looks effortless but costs more than a month's rent. She smiled at me, but it didn't touch her eyes. The evening was polite, but strained. Every time I asked him a question, she answered for him. When I brought up memories from years past, she steered the topic towards something current that kept her at the center. And when he laughed, it was different, like he was checking her face first to see if it was okay. By the time dessert arrived, my stomach ached. Not from the food, but from the effort of keeping my own smile in place. I left that night knowing my presence hadn't softened her view of me. If anything, it had solidified her control. Still, I kept trying in small ways. dropping off homemade soup when he was sick, sending him photos of things that reminded me of our shared past. He'd thank me, always polite, but the gratitude felt distant, like a guest thanking a host rather than family thanking family. One afternoon, I stopped by his place unannounced, something I'd done countless times before. She answered the door. "Oh," she said, leaning against the frame. "We weren't expecting you." Her tone was casual, but her body blocked the doorway just enough to make it clear I wasn't welcome inside. I caught a glimpse of him in the background, glancing up from his phone, his expression unreadable. I told her I'd just been in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off some muffins I'd baked. She took them with a practiced smile, thanked me, and closed the door before I could say anything else. Walking back to my car, the cool air stinging my cheeks, I realized my attempts weren't pulling him back. They were pushing me further to the edges of his life, and the harder I reached, the more the space between us grew. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Not until I was sure there was no other way. There's a point in every fight for someone you love when you stop playing fair. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning, over coffee that had gone cold in my hands. I'd been replaying the last few months in my head. The closed doors, the unanswered questions, the way she had gradually positioned herself between us, and I realized that if I kept waiting for him to see the truth on his own, I might be waiting forever. So I decided to act. I knew where she worked. He'd mentioned it once, back when he still told me about his life in detail. I also knew enough about her from the brief conversations we'd had to start piecing together a picture. But I needed more than instinct and unease. I needed facts. I called an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, who had once worked as a private investigator. I'd never hired anyone for something like this before. My voice shook as I explained what I wanted. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. Was I sure? Number. But I was certain about one thing. I wasn't going to watch her strip him of everything. His confidence, his independence, his trust, without at least trying to expose her. He agreed to take the job. 3 days, he said. I'll give you what I find. Those 3 days crawled by. I went through my routines, but my mind never stopped turning. Every time my phone buzzed, my pulse spiked. At night, I lay awake wondering if I was crossing a line I could never uncross. On the 4th morning, he called. "I've got something," he said. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions if 2 people speak in low voices over a corner booth. He slid a folder across the table. "She's not who she says she is," he began. I opened the folder. The first page was a resume, or rather, the resume she had used to get her current job. A degree from a well-known university. A string of impressive positions. But the deeper I read, the more it unraveled. The degree was fake. 2 of the jobs had never existed. One of the companies had confirmed she'd been fired for serious misconduct. The next section was worse. Financial records, credit reports, notes on previous relationships, each one following a pattern. She found men who were stable, generous, maybe even a little lonely. She became indispensable, moved in quickly, took over their schedules and their finances, and then, when they were isolated enough, she drained them. And when they tried to leave, she threatened, lied, or lashed out until she'd wrung them dry. My stomach churned as I closed the folder. "And he doesn't know any of this?" "Not a clue," my friend said. "If you tell him, be prepared. People in his position, they don't always believe the person bringing the bad news." I knew he was right. I'd seen it before. Love blinding someone so completely they'd defend the very thing destroying them. But I couldn't do nothing. As I drove home, the folder on the passenger seat beside me. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. I told myself I was ready for whatever came next. That I was doing this for him, even if it meant he might hate me for it. What I didn't realize then was that crossing that line wouldn't bring him back to me. It would push him further away than ever. I'd imagined a dozen ways the conversation might go. None of them matched the reality. I called him that same evening, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can we meet? I have something important to talk to you about." He hesitated. I could hear it in the pause before his answer. But he agreed. We decided on a small park halfway between our homes, the kind with winding paths and benches tucked under old trees. Neutral ground. I got there early, the folder clutched in my hands. It felt heavier than paper should. When he arrived, he looked tired. Not just physically, but in that deep, restless way that seeps into someone's posture. We exchanged a quick greeting before sitting down on one of the benches. I didn't waste time. "I need to tell you something about her." His expression closed immediately, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "If this is about boundaries again?" "It's not," I interrupted. "It's about who she really is. I had someone look into her background." He blinked at me, as if I'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. "You... what?" I slid the folder onto his lap. "Everything is in there. The fake degree, the jobs she never had, the people she's hurt before. I know this is hard to hear, but you need to know before she..." He stood up so quickly the folder slid to the ground, scattering papers across the path. "Are you serious? You hired someone to spy on her?" His voice was sharp, loud enough that a couple walking past glanced over. I bent down, gathering the papers, my hands shaking. "I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" He laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless sound. "From what? From the first person who's made me feel like I can live my own life without being treated like a child?" The words stung more than I wanted to admit. "You think this is about control? I'm showing you facts. She's done this before. 3 times. She takes everything and leaves people with nothing." He shook his head, stepping back. "Number this. This is you not being able to accept that I'm happy without you running everything." "That's not true." My voice broke despite my best effort to keep it steady. "I fought for you your whole life. I've been there through everything, and now you're choosing not to even look at the truth because it's coming from me?" He glanced down at the papers in my hands, then back at me, his eyes hard. "If you cared about my happiness, you'd trust my choices, even if you don't like them." The air between us felt heavy, almost metallic. I realized then that I wasn't going to win this fight. Not today. Maybe not ever. He turned to leave. I called after him once, twice, but he didn't stop. The folder hung limply in my grip, useless and weightless now, just ink on paper he'd never read. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, listening to the wind move through the branches. I'd crossed the line I swore I'd never cross. I'd given him the truth he needed, and still, he'd chosen her. I didn't sleep that night. The folder sat on my kitchen table, the papers spread out exactly as I'd left them when I came home. Every so often, I'd glance at them, as if the words might somehow change. They didn't. The facts were still the facts. But facts mean nothing to someone who doesn't want to believe them. By morning, I'd convinced myself to try again. Not with confrontation, but with patience. Maybe he just needed time to let the information sink in. Maybe the shock had made him defensive, and after a day or two, he'd call. He didn't. Instead, 2 days later, my phone lit up with his name. Relief rushed through me, until I answered. His voice was clipped, formal, like a stranger reading from a script. She told me what you're trying to do, he said. And it has to stop. I'm not trying to do anything except keep you safe, I said. You went behind my back. You dug into her life. That's not okay. She's lying to you, I pressed, desperate now. Everything she's built around you is fake. I can prove it. I don't want to see it, he cut in. Do you understand? I don't want to see it. I'm happy. And if you can't accept that, then maybe we need some space. The word space landed like a cold stone in my chest. That's her talking, I said quietly. He sighed. Number, this is me talking. I can't keep defending my relationship to you. I won't. And then the call ended. I sat there in the silence, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. Proof and denial. They're like oil and water. You can pour the truth straight into someone's hands, but if their heart is sealed, it will slip right through their fingers. The days after that blurred together. I kept my distance because I didn't know what else to do. But distance meant I saw things from the outside. And sometimes, seeing from the outside is worse. I'd catch glimpses of them around town, at the market, or walking down the street. She was always at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her gaze flicking toward anyone who might approach. It wasn't possessiveness, exactly. It was control, disguised as affection. And every time I saw him, there was a little less of the man I knew. He was quieter, quicker to defer to her, slower to smile without reason. I thought about all the times I'd stepped in for him before. When he was too young to understand a danger. When he was too trusting. When the world tried to take advantage of his kindness. I'd always been able to shield him somehow. But this wasn't something I could put my hands around and block. This was inside his heart, inside his mind. A choice he had made and kept making no matter what I showed him. And deep down, I started to realize the thing I didn't want to admit. You can't save someone who doesn't want saving. When the call came, I knew it wouldn't be good news. It was a rainy Thursday, the kind of day where the clouds hang low enough to feel like they're pressing on the rooftops. I'd just made tea when my phone rang. His name on the screen sent a jolt through me, part hope, part dread. He didn't waste time on small talk. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. I offered to meet somewhere neutral, but he insisted I come to their apartment. The moment I stepped inside, I knew she had staged the setting. Everything was immaculate, flowers on the table, the faint scent of some expensive candle in the air. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, legs crossed, her smile polite but razor sharp. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets. I want you to stop, he began. Stop what? I asked, though I already knew. Stop trying to turn me against her. Stop digging into her past. Stop interfering in my life. His tone was deliberate, measured, too measured, like the words had been rehearsed. I looked at him, really looked. His posture was defensive, his eyes restless. And then I turned to her. She didn't flinch. I'm not trying to turn you against anyone, I said carefully. I'm trying to keep you from being hurt. That's your opinion, she said smoothly, leaning back as though she'd just been handed the floor. But your version of help is toxic. You think you know what's best for him, but you don't. He's an adult. He can decide who he wants in his life. Her voice was soft, but every word was a nail being driven in. I turned back to him. Everything I've shown you is true? The documents? The records? I don't want to talk about them, he interrupted. I don't care what you think you found. I care about my marriage, and I'm not going to let anyone destroy it. There it was. Marriage. The word hit like a physical blow. He hadn't told me. I hadn't been invited. And now, I was standing in the aftermath of a decision that had locked him even further into her grip. I swallowed hard. So that's it? You're choosing her over me? His jaw tightened. I'm choosing my life. And if that means we can't see each other for a while, then maybe that's for the best. Silence filled the room. I could hear the faint tick of a clock somewhere, each second heavier than the last. Finally, I nodded. If that's what you want. I walked to the door, my hands cold despite the heat inside. As I reached for the handle, I heard her voice behind me, low enough that he might not have caught it. You see? He's fine without you. I didn't turn around. I just stepped out into the hallway, the air thick with the scent of her perfume, and knew that whatever happened next, the distance between us had just become something permanent. There's a moment in every struggle where you realize the fight is over. Not because you've lost all hope, but because you finally see that the other person has made their choice. For me, that moment came quietly, without drama. No shouting, no slamming doors. Just a slow, heavy understanding that settled over me like dusk. It had been weeks since that confrontation in their apartment. Weeks without a single call, message, or visit from him. I'd gone from hearing his voice almost every day to hearing nothing at all. The silence was deafening, and yet I didn't break it. Something told me that if he wanted to reach out, he would. And if he didn't, forcing it would only push him further away. So I waited. And then, one afternoon, I saw them in town. They were across the street, walking together, her hand tucked into his arm. She was smiling at something he'd said, and he looked content. Not joyful, not free, but settled, as if this was simply the life he'd chosen and he'd stopped questioning it. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did, and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, I stayed where I was, half hidden in the doorway of a shop, watching them pass. It was like watching a scene from a play you'd been cut out of. Familiar, but no longer yours. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about all the battles I'd fought for him over the years. Some I'd won, some I hadn't, but I'd always believed my love, my presence, could shield him from the worst of the world. And maybe it had, until now. Because this wasn't a danger I could step in front of. It wasn't a single moment I could stop, or a threat I could remove. It was a choice he had made, and continued to make, every day. Letting go didn't feel like relief. It felt like failure. Like standing at the edge of a road and watching someone you love disappear into the distance, knowing you won't follow. Not because you don't want to, but because you can't. I told myself I was still here if he needed me, that I would answer if he called. But I also knew that if I kept chasing, I'd lose the last pieces of myself I still had. And so, in the quiet of that evening, I whispered the words I'd never thought I'd say. I can't protect him from this. It was both a surrender and a truth. The kind of truth that doesn't set you free, but at least stops you from fighting shadows. But this wasn't something I could put my hands around and block. This was inside his heart, inside his mind. A choice he had made and kept making, no matter what I showed him. And deep down, I started to realize the thing I didn't want to admit. You can't save someone who doesn't want saving. Letting go in words is one thing. Letting go in practice, that's something else entirely. In the weeks that followed, I found myself moving differently through the world. I still passed places that reminded me of him. The little cafe where we'd shared countless breakfasts. The park bench where he once told me about his dreams. But instead of going in, I kept walking. Not because I didn't want to remember, but because I knew those spaces weren't ours anymore. And yet, I couldn't help but watch from the edges. It wasn't intentional at first. I'd bump into mutual acquaintances who'd mention seeing him, or I'd overhear a snippet of conversation in the grocery store. Then, without meaning to, I began noticing patterns. They were always together. She was always steering, and he was always just a little quieter than the man I remembered. From the outside, their life looked picture perfect. Smiling photos on social media, posts about weekend trips, dinners at nice restaurants. But I recognized the subtle tells. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way his shoulders sloped ever so slightly forward in every picture, like he was carrying a weight no one else could see. I knew those signs because I'd seen them before, in other people who had been slowly diminished, piece by piece, until they no longer realized what they'd lost. Still, I didn't step in. Not anymore. I'd learned my lesson. If the truth comes from the wrong person, it will never be heard. Sometimes, I'd see them in passing. Once, at the market, I turned down an aisle, and there they were, picking out fruit. She spotted me first. Her smile was polite, her tone neutral when she said hello, but her eyes held that same glint I'd noticed the first day we met. A quiet confidence that she'd won, and I was no longer a factor. He greeted me too, but it was brief, and I could feel the invisible line between us, drawn by her hand. I didn't cross it. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain blur the streetlights. I realized I wasn't just watching from a distance. I was grieving. Not for the loss of him entirely, but for the loss of the version of him that existed when we were close, when trust flowed both ways, when I could still protect him. From that distance, I saw the small changes that added up to something bigger, the isolation, the subtle dependence, the quiet compliance. It was like watching someone drift out to sea, knowing the shore is still behind them, but also knowing they won't turn back until they're too far to swim. And maybe that's the cruelest kind of love. The kind where you have to stand still and let the person you'd give anything for walk a path you know will hurt them. The breaking point didn't arrive with fireworks or some grand unveiling of the truth. It came quietly, almost mundanely, on a gray afternoon in early winter. I was at home, sorting through a stack of old papers, when my phone buzzed. It wasn't him. It was a mutual friend, their voice hushed and urgent. "I thought you should know. Things aren't going well over there." They didn't elaborate much, just enough for me to piece together the picture. Financial trouble, strained arguments behind closed doors, her temper showing more often in public. The curated perfection of their life was beginning to fray, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, he would see it now. That hope lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, I saw a post online. A smiling photo of them at some resort, cocktails in hand, captions filled with words about getting away from negativity and choosing love above all else. I knew exactly who those words were aimed at, but what I didn't know until later was how she had spun the narrative. In her version, she was the victim, beset by jealous outsiders who wanted to sabotage their happiness. And in that story, I was the central antagonist. A week later, I ran into another acquaintance. They gave me that pitying look, the kind you get when someone's already decided which side they're on. "I heard you tried to break them up," they said. "It must be hard, losing like that." Losing. The word echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. Because that's exactly what it was. I had lost. Not just him, but the battle for his trust, the fight to keep him from harm. She'd managed to twist every fact, every warning, into proof of her loyalty to him and proof of my supposed interference. And even as their life together continued to crack in private, in public she still held the advantage. She knew the power of appearances. She knew how to keep just enough charm in the mix to make outsiders doubt any rumor, any truth that didn't fit the picture she'd painted. I didn't know how much damage had been done until I saw him again, months later. He looked older, not in the natural way, but worn, like fabric that's been pulled too tight for too long. We exchanged a few words on the street. Nothing personal, nothing real. And yet, even in that brief moment, I could see it. He was still standing beside her. Still choosing her. The worst part wasn't that she'd hurt him. It was that she'd convinced him to believe it was love. And that was a lie I couldn't undo, no matter how much proof I'd ever had. After that brief encounter, I stopped waiting for him to come back. It wasn't a decision I made in one clean moment, more like a slow loosening of the grip I'd kept for so long. I began focusing on the small parts of my life I'd neglected while fighting for him. Mornings became quieter, filled with coffee at my own kitchen table without glancing at my phone, waiting for his name to appear. I went back to old hobbies, things that had nothing to do with him, things that reminded me I had an identity outside of being his protector. But every so often, I'd hear news. A whispered update through mutual friends, a photo that drifted across my feed, a passing mention in the checkout line. Sometimes the news was good. A promotion at work, a trip abroad. Other times, the tone was heavier. A sudden move to a smaller place, rumors of tension that no one dared to confirm. I didn't seek out the details anymore. Still, I couldn't pretend I didn't care. Caring was second nature. It had been for years. One rainy evening, I found myself walking near the edge of town, past the little cafe where we'd shared our last safe moment. The windows glowed warm against the cold, the faint hum of conversation spilling out each time the door opened. I paused outside, looking in, half expecting to see him sitting there. He wasn't. But the chair we'd once claimed as ours sat empty, and for a moment, I let myself imagine he'd walk through the door any second, coffee in hand, smile easy and unguarded. Then the image faded, leaving only the truth. Those days were gone. Letting go didn't mean I stopped loving him. It meant accepting that my love had limits, that no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't rewrite his choices. I couldn't pull him out of a life he'd decided to stay in. And maybe that was the hardest part to face. Not that I'd failed to protect him, but that I'd failed to accept he had the right to walk straight into the harm I saw coming. There's a certain peace in surrender, but it's not the kind that makes you smile. It's the kind that leaves you sitting in a quiet room, hands folded, heart still a little raw, but no longer fighting battles you can't win. In the end, I didn't lose because she was smarter or stronger. I lost because I was trying to fight for someone who didn't want to be saved. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking how to win and start learning how to live with the loss. Time has a way of softening edges, even when it doesn't erase them. The sharp panic I used to feel whenever I thought of him has dulled into something quieter, something that settles in my chest like a familiar ache. Months have passed since I last saw him. I no longer expect to run into him at the market or hear his voice on the other end of the phone. The empty spaces where he used to be are still there, but I've learned to move around them. Sometimes, I imagine what I would say if he walked through my door right now. I wouldn't start with accusations or proof or warnings. I think I'd just ask if he was eating well, if he was sleeping enough, if he'd found something in his days that made him feel light again. Because all the rest, the choices, the mistakes, the harm, those are his now. They belong to him in a way I can't take away, no matter how much I wish I could. I used to believe that love meant protection, that if you cared enough, you could shield someone from anything. But there's a truth I carry now, one that's heavy, but steady. You can't protect someone from themselves. There's a certain mercy in finally accepting that. It means I can let go of the endless what ifs, the replayed arguments, the imaginary speeches where I finally get through to him. I can stop holding my breath, waiting for a change that may never come. On quiet evenings, I still think of him. I picture the way his eyes used to light up when he laughed, the way he'd tell a story with his whole body, like the world was wide open to him. I hold on to those memories, not because I think we'll ever return to them, but because they remind me of who he was before all this, and maybe, somewhere deep down, still is. If there's one thing I hope, it's that someday he finds his way back to himself. Even if I'm not there to see it, even if my role in his life is nothing more than a chapter he's long since closed. And so, I whisper my goodbye. Not sharp, not bitter, but slow and soft, like closing a door against the wind. The kind of goodbye that lingers, not because it's unfinished, but because it's given with love. The one thing I couldn't protect him from was the life he chose. And now, my choice is to step back, let the tide carry us where it will, and trust that whatever shore he lands on, he'll find a way to stand. Thank you for reading the whole story. Hope you will support my next products.